Thanks for joining us. We're excited to dig into this topic. So obviously, sleep is a funny thing. We often ignore it when it goes well, and we really feel its consequences when it's broken or when we're struggling with sleep. And recently, it's become a hot topic in the health and wellness spheres, and for good reason. It's really critical for health and well-being. And so today, I'm thrilled to have our speaker join us, Dr. Dale Rae. Dale is an Associate Professor at the University of Cape Town and a C2-rated scientist with a serious passion for sleep. Her research digs deep into how sleep impacts everything from our physical and mental health to our performance at work and in sports as well. She's not just about the science, though. Dale is also the director of Sleep Science, which is a UCT spin-off dedicated to actually, instituting some of the learnings from the science and helping people like us assess and optimize our sleep for a healthier and more vibrant life. So we're really lucky to have her insights today. So yeah, with that, over to Dale to give us a brief overview, and we'll have some time for questions as well after that. Thanks, Dale.
Great. Thanks very much, Jared. Thanks for the introduction, and hi, everybody. I hope you're well, and I'm excited to share this with you. I'm just going to quickly share my screen, and then we're going to get cracking. So great. So you should be able to see that. So we're going to be chatting today about how sleep could really be your superpower, which I feel very strongly about. And I hope that you will agree with me by the end of this particular talk. Great. So I don't know how many of you relate to this, but in my mind, life is absolutely crazy. There are just not enough hours in the day. I feel completely frantic, more so than ever now that life has picked up again after COVID times. And the problem is that we only have 24 hours in the day. And when we need to get stuff done, when we're super busy, I can guarantee you that most of us are not going to steal time from work, certainly not, maybe not from family time. Generally, we're going to be stealing time from sleep. And so it should be a ring-fenced part of our day, but actually what happens is it is really a little bit of a time sink that we can sort of eke into when we need to get work done or socialize. And the reality is that we are actually shortchanging our bodies and our brains on a really important aspect of our health. So there are a lot of books that have been written quite recently around sleep, encouraging people to take it relatively seriously now, certainly in the pop literature, and there's quite a bit out there. But perhaps another way to look at it is, this is Steve Harvey, who's a US talk show host, and he made this rather infamous comment a couple of years ago saying that basically you can't be asleep for a third of your life because you're going to get left behind. And indeed, certainly in the corporate world, I think that there's a lot of sort of badge wearing when it comes to being a short sleeper. And so the question is that for everybody? And I mean, for sure, we have, looking back in history and in more recent times, we've got some pretty exceptional humans that are notorious short sleepers. And believe me, if I could be a 4-hour sleeper and have 20 hours in the day at my disposal, I'd be at the front of that queue, because it seems like we would have more time to be productive and perhaps to even be efficient. It's interesting to me, though, when you look at it from the perspective of athletes, and sports, of course, is the other extreme, that some of our world's most incredible athletes place a completely different value or store on sleep, referring to it as important for recovery. And it's not just the duration that's important, but the quality, which is quite right. And I can hear you saying, yeah, sure, but it's quite different to use your brain cognitively to be a sort of a business leader versus being an athlete where you're literally paid to eat, sleep, and train. I do understand that, and it certainly begs the question, then, if we can treat sleep so differently, does it actually really matter? Well, the reality is that sleep is critical for survival. We know that every single living organism on our planet must rest in a 24-hour period. And we also know that without sleep, the outcome without sleep over an extended period of time, the outcome is death. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but we can go for about 3 days without water. We can go for about 3 months without food. And the estimations from animal model studies, for obvious reasons, is that with humans, we could probably survive continuously without sleep for somewhere in the realm of 5 to 30 days, after which we would die. So it's a critical part of life. And I don't want to speak about all the known functions around sleep. I just want to draw your attention to 2 or 3 that are super important. And the first relates to this brain connectivity here. And so essentially, this means that when we sleep, one of the massive benefits that we reap is that we lay down memory, for example, and also importantly is that we reinforce all the neural pathways that we made use of during the daytime, so that next time we try to execute a specific skill or remember how to get from A to B or retain information, all of those things get embedded while we sleep. So that's an incredibly important function. The other important function that I want to draw your attention to refers to this function here around removing waste and toxins. So when we sleep, the glymphatic system, which is literally a drainage system around our brain, is responsible for making sure that all the metabolic byproducts that are built up during the daytime get removed at nighttime. The interesting part here, which has recently come to light, is that scientists have discovered that in people who develop premature neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, when it happens earlier than what it should do, they have a lot of something called beta amyloid, which is present in their brain. And we know that one of the functions of sleep is actually to remove beta amyloid, which builds up on a daily basis, so that we currently think that if you don't have sufficient sleep on a night-to-night basis, you may increase your risk in the future for early onset Alzheimer's, for example. And then the third thing that I just want to draw your attention to around sleep is it's important around immunity. So if we can think very crudely about our immune system having 2 main functions, such that during the daytime, our immune system is busy protecting us against viruses or pathogens that we might be exposed to by inhaling them, for example, or touching them and then ingesting them. That's an important aspect of your immune system. But when we sleep, another part of our immune system is active, and that's the part that trawls your body looking for damaged or mutated cells and destroys them, so that you don't end up with misformed proteins or cancerous masses, for example. It also then builds our antibodies that we need to defend us against viruses or pathogens that we were exposed to during the daytime. So essentially, if you don't give your body sufficient time to do this critical housework in terms of immunity at nighttime, you could increase your risk for susceptibility to illness and disease in the short and in the long term. So when we think about sleep, most people will think about how much sleep do I need? These are the guidelines that have been published. They've been shared globally from the National Sleep Foundation in the US, and it's based on all the available literature that has asked the question, how much sleep do we need to optimize physical and mental health? So this is not just, oh, I think that we want to get people to sleep more. This is actually evidence-based. And you can see here that for young adults, 18 to 25, and adults a little bit older, 26 to 64, on average, the recommendation is that we need about 7 to 9 hours of sleep. You'll notice, however, that for some people, 6 in this blue bit here might be sufficient, and for others, 10 or 11 is necessary. So there's actually a 4-hour range. And I think that's really important to understand, is that we don't all have the same sleep need. It's not 8 hours for everybody. Some people need as little as 6, others need as much as 10 or 11. But there's probably a bell-shaped distribution, with most people being in the middle. I think what has really clearly come out of this, however, is that continuously sleeping, when I say continuously, I mean night after night for many, many years, continuously sleeping less than 6 hours is certainly associated with very poor health outcomes, which I can chat about in a second. But not only should our sleep be of sufficient duration, there are aspects of its quality that are very, very important. So we like our sleep to be regular in terms of its timing. And this little image here gives you some insights as to what regular sleep might look like. Each of these rows is a 24-hour period, and the blue bits here are a person's sleep over the course of a week. And what you can see by taking a helicopter view here is that this person's sleep is very consistent from night to night. They more or less go to bed and wake up at the same time each day, and their sleep is of similar duration. And we can see that this is an example of an irregularly timed sleep pattern in terms of both timing and duration. And in fact, regularity has recently been shown to be more important for long-term health than sleep duration per se. And we think that the importance here is as it relates to synchronizing your body's 24-hour rhythms or circadian rhythms. And so when we have a very disjointed sleep pattern, we create havoc with our body's internal clock, and that puts a lot of strain on our metabolism, and it can increase sort of risk for weight gain, for example, and eventually cardiovascular and metabolic diseases. So having a regular sleep pattern is important, and then having sleep which is continuous is important too. And then there's another thing that I think a lot of people don't really think about in terms of their sleep health, and that is that you need to actually sleep in sync with your body's own clock. So what does that really mean practically? Well, I'm sure that you've heard of either the terms owls or larks, or night owls or morning people. So that morning person is the person that jumps out of bed early in the morning, doesn't need an alarm, has loads of energy, likes to train, likes to work, likes to generally will be hungry and will want to eat breakfast. Whereas the night owl in the morning is that grumpy, moody person, barely gets a couple of words out, definitely has no appetite, couldn't think of anything worse than having to train, and is not keen to work then either. Whereas by the end of the day, the roles have switched, and that morning person is done. They need to shut down for the day. They look like that party pooper. And of course, the night owl is just warming up, and they will describe that they now have their best energy. They're able to think and be creative at nighttime. And this is actually driven genetically, by the way. So we can't necessarily change it too much. And of course, we probably exist along a spectrum in terms of this. We're not really categorized in such a binary manner. Many people sit in the middle as what we would classify neither types. And so neither type would have a natural bedtime of around 11 p.m. and a natural wake-up time of around 7. And then, of course, the morning and evening types would be on either side of that. And so what is really important is to consider, what is your clock? What would your body naturally do in terms of sleep timing? And can you get your sleep timing to line up with your clock? It is best for a night owl, for example, to have a natural bedtime of midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, and if possible, to be sleeping in as much as possible, leaving things to the last minute in the morning. So the question is then, what exactly is healthy sleep? So sleep is healthy when we have one consolidated nocturnal sleep. We are diurnal creatures, which means that we're designed to sleep at nighttime. We're designed to sleep once. We're not polyphasic sleepers. And certainly, like your cat would be a polyphasic sleeper. That's not what we're designed to do. And essentially, we're designed to sleep. Our rest phase is supposed to be more or less between sunset and sunrise. We should have consistent sleep timing and duration. The timing of our sleep should be in sync with our clock, such that we, if you are a morning person, you have an early to bed, early to rise sort of pattern. Your sleep-wake patterns should be more or less aligned with the environment, so more or less sleeping when it's dark. We shouldn't have any problems falling asleep or staying asleep. And most importantly, you can't claim that you have healthy sleep if you're using sleeping medication. So a person who has naturally healthy sleep is able to sleep unmedicated. Another thing to consider is that we shouldn't be heavily reliant on catch-up sleep or naps. So when we constantly shortchange our sleep during the week, one of the sort of habits that we tend, or the traps we fall into, is extending our sleep on the weekends to catch up. So catch-up sleep would be defined as sleep which is longer than an hour and a half on the weekends compared to what you were doing in the week. And similarly, we shouldn't be heavily reliant on daytime naps. The odd treat nap here and there, not a problem. If you're an athlete with a super high training load, if you're recovering from illness, if you're a parent to new children, these are examples. If you're a shift worker, if you're an adolescent, these are examples of people who do get a nap license. But for the rest of us, we should be getting the most of our sleep at night, and we shouldn't be heavily reliant on napping on a day-to-day basis. Our sleep is supposed to feel restorative. It's such a silly thing to think about, but it's really true. We don't really care what happens while we're asleep. We're pretty much unconscious, but we care very much about how we feel during the daytime. And the job of sleep is to restore us so that we can be full of beans during the day. We should feel rested with optimal levels of daytime functioning the next day too. So really, sleep enables us to be on our A game in all of these respects. And that's why I consider it to be, in fact, a superpower. There are not a lot of things which can address all of these aspects of our health, our cognition, and our overall well-being. And so it is something that is really worth investing in. So what are the risk factors that we typically face for poor sleep? Well, I think we can look at some lifestyle-related risk factors. For example, overconsumption of caffeine is one. A lot of alcohol, even though it might help a person chill out at the end of the day, high levels of alcohol are incredibly disruptive to sleep. A lot of drugs will, whether we're looking at recreational drugs, specifically thinking about different stimulants and central nervous system depressants, all have negative effects on our sleep. Having to work night shift, of course, transmeridian traveling east to west across multiple time zones impacts our sleep, although that's usually a temporary change. And then, of course, trying to be social and keep up with everybody sort of intrudes on our sleep opportunity time too. There are environmental factors that we consider, living in a very noisy environment. I had a lot of people that I chat to living in townships who say that there's a tavern or a shebeen next door, or there's always loud music, and our walls on our homes are so thin, it's very difficult to be in a peaceful environment to sleep. And of course, excessive light at night. So this is the artificial light that we have in our homes and in our cities, which has a massive impact on delaying our body clock by suppressing melatonin and making it harder for us to fall asleep at a reasonable hour. And then from a psychosocial perspective, of course, there's things like anxiety, worry, responsibilities, and having to care for either children or other members of our family that can all impact on our sleep opportunity. There are a number of medical conditions, of course, that will impact sleep, and as will some well-known sleep disorders like insomnia, obstructive sleep apnea, restless leg syndrome. And if these are not well managed, we end up with incredibly poor quality sleep. But many people, I think, are subjected to the impact of stress on their sleep on a relatively regular basis. And so I think that many of you probably have experienced a couple of nights where you get those racing thoughts and that crazy mind that won't shut down, very often related to stress and sadly often related to work-related stress. And then this can present as some kind of insomnia. Either it can make it difficult for us to fall asleep, or we crash, we get those first couple of hours of sleep, and then we wake up somewhere between 1 and 3 in the morning, and our brain is going absolutely berserk, and it's very difficult to reattain sleep then. And so over time, when this happens, we accumulate sleep debt, which puts us on a path of being susceptible to burnout. So the short-term consequences of stress, and I'm sure many of you can adhere or at least relate to this, when you haven't had good sleep for a couple of nights, you'll notice that your moodiness changes and your ability to regulate your emotions. And we speak about this in the sense of being stress reactive. And so you are much more likely to be short, grumpy, fly off the handle, things that you would usually take on board and be able to manage quite easily suddenly become a really big deal. And you'll notice that there might be physiological changes that go along with this as well, like increased heart rate, increased breathing rate, etc. Sometimes people will experience somatic indications of acute sleep debt. So they may suffer from headaches, for example, or get more joint pain than usual, or GI issues as well. There are psychosocial issues, as I've mentioned, changes in our mood and ability to control emotions, and importantly, big changes in our cognition. And this is probably the area that sort of some psychologists have looked at most from a research perspective. And it's extremely well documented that when we don't have sufficient sleep, we impact things like our cognition, our ability to pay attention, our ability to access memories, for example, judgment, creativity. We're more likely to make risky decisions or engage in risky behavior. And so many of these things can directly impact our work ability as well as our own safety. And then another thing to think about is changes that happen with regards to our perceptions around and our relationship with food. So essentially, when we've had 1 or 2 nights of awful sleep, 2 things change. Firstly, we feel less inclined to move the next day. We feel a bit sorry for ourselves, and we might go, oh, I think I'll just skip that gym session today. I'm really feeling bad because I didn't get good sleep last night. And so there goes your opportunity to increase your energy expenditure in a given day. And coupled with that, the way that we think about food and the choices we make are typically poorer. So a sleep-deprived brain does not want to eat carrot sticks. It's going to want sugar, and it generally asks us for sweet or salty food. And so coupling that with a reduced propensity to move means that very quickly we put ourselves into this risk of being prone towards more weight gain. So my question then to you to end off is, are you at your sleep sweet spot? So if you say yes to, for example, some of these questions, you may not be. The question is, are you extending your sleep duration on the weekends by more than an hour and a half? Because that would be suggestive of significant catch-up sleep. If you're taking less than 5 minutes to fall asleep, you also might be suffering from sleep debt. A normal amount of time to fall asleep is somewhere in the realm of sort of 5 to 20 minutes. If you're napping regularly, so on a near daily basis, I would suggest that you're not at your sleep sweet spot either. Of course, if you don't wake up feeling refreshed, we'd like to investigate why. If you feel foggy or excessively tired or sleepy during the daytime, then that would suggest that you're also not at your sleep sweet spot. And if you've noticed changes in your emotions, mood, for example, then that also would be suggestive of insufficient sleep. And other people will report changes in their functionality in regards to memory, productivity, ability to multitask, etc. So I'm asking you to think about whether or not you might be at your sleep sweet spot. And if no, what could you do to shift you towards having healthier sleep? Right. So I'm just wondering if there are any questions.
There are lots, Dale, lots and lots. Thank you very much for that overview. Obviously, it's such a broad topic. I mean, we can't cover it all. But yeah, I thought there's a couple of things we could maybe dive into a bit deeper. So, given the demanding nature of corporate roles, many Strove users feel that they have to sacrifice sleep to sort of get ahead in the office. So from a scientific perspective, is this truly a trade-off, or are there kind of hidden costs to consistently undersleeping that outweigh any sort of increase in productivity that you might experience?
Yeah. So I don't think it's a great trade-off to make. Obviously, I'm coming with a sleep hat, but the long-term risks to your physical and mental health are just so massive that it doesn't make sense. And I would also argue that a person that is sleeping less than what they need to, you're actually not usually as productive or effective as you could be if you have had better sleep. And so I think that the short-term costs mean that you might be more inefficient, and the long-term costs, I don't think outweigh the benefit of trying to get ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I suppose what a lot of people end up doing, that they sacrifice their sleep, and then they start relying on stimulants like caffeine during the day to kind of keep them going. And I mean, what's the impact there? And is that an effective strategy to try and deal with, feeling tired?
Yeah, I think we have to have a look at it from very briefly 2 different lenses. If you've had some uncontrollables and you've had a couple of nights and it's not a bad sleep and it's beyond your control, then yes, using some caffeine, for example, just to get you through, it's a sensible strategy in many respects. But if that is your MO on a monthly, yearly, annual basis, it's really not great, because the consequences are that it means that you're masking the problem. And the caffeine or the stimulant also impacts the quality of your sleep.
Yeah, okay. I was interested to hear what you were saying about regularity. I think that's something that we see very commonly is kind of maybe, not being able to get to bed at the same time. But often when you say to someone, look, you need to get to bed at the same time, they say, well, they just find it impossible. There's too many distractions and things to do. And so, how would they go about doing that? Would they maybe start focusing on their wake up time first? How would they, try and get into that sort of regular cycle?
Yeah, that's a great question. So your wake up time is actually the thing that is the most inflexible, because usually that's dictated by the time that you need to get to work. So not many people have, or, and like family responsibilities, getting kids to school, etc. Not many people have too much flexibility around that wake up time. What we typically see is that the part that we can control is when we go to bed. And so just trying to be rhythmic from that side is a good idea. I just want to note something here. It's really bad to obsess and try to absolutely control sleep. I think that's a disaster. I think when you over focus on something, you end up creating a problem that isn't there. So you want some degree of flexibility. Just like we think heart rate variability is good, I think some degree of flexibility and when you go to sleep is a good idea. But you in any given week, if you can aim for a range from earliest to latest bedtime in the realm of 1.5 to 2 hours, absolute maximum, that would probably be okay.
Yeah. I mean, Lungelo's asked a good follow-up question here, and you know, as someone who identifies as a night owl, but who has to be up early, like what are the options for them? You know, they find themselves energetic at night and then sort of dreading that 5:30 wake up or 5 a.m. wake up.
Yeah. I mean, the short option is this is where flexi hours really come into their own. And considering, could we see a future in workspaces where the common work time is 10 till 4, something like that, allowing people to have that flexibility to come in late without being judged, so that there isn't this sort of crunching of your sleep at the wake up time for the night owls. You know, we typically see that, you know, look at sleep as a sign of laziness and a sign of weakness. And I have a bit of a problem with that, because I think then it would be like us saying to the morning people, well, can you guys please stay at work till 9 o'clock tonight?
Yeah.
You know, how comfortable are you going to be with that? So I think a little bit of flexibility in the way that we manage it is important. Failing that, being in a very rigid work system, then night owls will very often need to rely on some napping to try and pay back some of that sleep debt.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's another question here about, you know, having had a sleeping issue for decades and just really struggling to get better. And I thought maybe you could talk to us about some of the work you do at Sleep Science and how you would approach sort of, you know, getting down to the root of the problem and helping someone like that.
Sure. So sleep is definitely a habit, without a doubt. And so we can entrench healthy sleep habits and less healthy sleep habits. And when a person sort of says, I've had a sleep issue for decades, it's usually become quite a large part of their identity. And so it becomes slightly more tricky to work with that. But the first port of call, like anything, you would do an assessment to work out exactly what's happening, looking for risk factors, looking for factors which might have triggered poor sleep. Are they still present? Looking for precipitating factors, looking for perpetuating factors. What is entrenching this current sleep habit, and trying to figure out where the points of intervention might be. It's definitely not a one-size-fits-all process. Solving people's chronic sleep issues is very individualized. It is literally, because I always say to people, by the time they end up in my office here, they've been everywhere. They've seen every doctor. They have tried every single trick on Dr. Google, every supplement, and none of that's worked, because those are all very generic responses. And so it is really a matter of doing detective work on a one-on-one basis.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on something there with the supplements, and I think that's, you know, everyone's looking for a quick fix, and we've got, you know, an army of podcasters out there telling us about the latest, you know, magnesium supplement or ashwagandha, or, you know, pick your poison. You know, is there such a thing as a quick fix, or is this a lot more complicated than that?
Yeah, I don't think so, because if there was, we wouldn't have people with sleeping issues. And I think that the problem with sleep is because there's an aspect of it which is behavioral, and making behavior change is very difficult. And so I think often that a lot of the onus is actually placed on the individuals to put the work in, which is really, really hard. But then also just misunderstanding why a person can't sleep. I think if you can't tell everybody that they need magnesium supplements, and most of these things don't work anyway. You know, you've got to work out what the key issue is. So most of the time, the quick fixes are just not useful. So you speak about something called sleep hygiene. It was one of those sort of topics or questions, and I've steered pretty clear from that for quite a good reason.
Okay.
First, I don't like the term hygiene. It sounds like we're trying to clean our sleep. I think that thinking about healthy sleep practices is important. I think that most of us would benefit from using healthy sleep practices. Be consistent, be careful with light at night, make sure you don't overdo it on the caffeine side of things, but don't not have any of those things. You need to be a human, and you need to be a happy human at that. But generally, those sort of healthy sleep practices are good for the average person who's not doing anything sort of too outrageous, but they really are quite hopeless when a person's got an entrenched sleep problem, because their problem is so much bigger than some of those behavior changes we're asking about.
Yeah, I've also been irritated with that term. I mean, you know, if you're not doing some of those things, are you unhygienic? I mean, like, it's a bit of a strange one to go with, right? The other thing, you know, obviously with Strobe, we're a technology company, and we bring in a lot of data from wearables, and, you know, everyone's got a little, you know, sleep computer on their wrist, and some of the data that we're getting through there, people are, you know, either stressing about or using it to try and improve their sleep. I mean, what's your kind of takeaway on this revolution in kind of sleep data?
Yeah, I think on one hand, it's very cool because it means that people are taking sleep more seriously and they're actually paying attention to it. And I think that's exciting. There's potential for big data, which is also very exciting. The reality is that how you interpret that data and what you do with it and how often you engage with it, those are the key factors. I always think that when it comes to measurement, it's not a good idea to do it every day. Just as like we would never suggest that you get on a scale every single day, that would become obsessive. By the same token, I don't even look at my sleep watch every day. I'll take a look here and there. You need to understand that they're relatively inaccurate still.
Yeah.
So they can often provide you with inaccurate feedback. And I think the important thing is to really just work out how do you feel in the daytime and try and make the link between your practices and how you feel more than what a device is telling you. Where they are helpful from time to time is to see how regular am I being, how consistent am I being, so every now and then to have a quick look, no problem, but certainly not on an obsessive or super, not too often.
Yeah, like I think that makes sense. Sometimes you wake up feeling great, and you have a look at your watch, and it tells you that you're about to die, which is concerning.
Exactly.
I'm aware of your, we close to the end of this. Maybe we can just take one more question, which is there's a question here about sleep apnea and CPAP. And I mean, I think maybe we can start a little bit earlier in that process. A lot of people snore. Maybe your partner says to you, "Hey, you were snoring last night." And when should we think about snoring as maybe a little bit more, and how do we go about investigating and treating sleep apnea?
Yeah, that's great. So sleep apnea and snoring do go hand in hand. Snoring by itself on a mild level is not usually a train smash. Once a person snores very loudly and for a large part of the night, it actually disrupts your own sleep quite badly, even though it doesn't wake you. They're lovely little apps that you can use, like something called Snore Lab. You can go and record yourself for a night or two and decide if it needs to have something done or not. Sleep apnea is, as you know, the second most common sleep disorder. So if your bed partner notices that you stop breathing in the nighttime, if you notice that your weight is creeping up, that you've moved into maybe you've become hypertensive, those would be three pretty big risk factor or warning signs, I would imagine. And I would suggest then that you go and be appraised for obstructive sleep apnea specifically, because it's something that should be managed. 80% of people with apnea don't actually know that they have it, and the long-term risks on your cardiovascular health are massive. So definitely worth investigating when those three little guys start to raise their head.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't mean that everyone with some sleep apnea is going to end up on a CPAP, or, are there other treatment options as well?
It depends on the severity and it depends on the cause of the collapse of the upper airways. For some people, a CPAP is what is needed to treat. And for other people, there can be some more, they may require surgery, and other people may require some lifestyle adjustments, which reduce body weight, for example. Obesity is a huge issue.
Yeah.
So fitness training, weight loss, these things can definitely help alleviate some of the symptoms. So the approach would be not always just straight to a CPAP device. We'd need to work out what the best would be for each person.
Okay, brilliant. That makes sense. I mean, there's a lot of interest in this topic, and I think we're going to have to invite you back for another session at some point. But thanks so much for joining us and sharing your knowledge. It was really insightful, and hopefully we can all start taking our sleep a little bit more seriously. So thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Take care.